That Friday at 11:47 p.m., I watched the most powerful woman in our company collapse against my car door, mascara streaming down her face, begging me not to tell anyone what I'd seen. Vivian Hale, the executive who made grown men tremble in boardrooms, was shaking so hard she couldn't unlock her own phone. What happened next would change everything I thought I knew about strength, about weakness, and about the invisible walls we build to survive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. If this story touches you, drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Hit that like button and stay with me until the end. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The fluorescent lights of Franklin and Meyer Marketing hummed their familiar tune as Ethan Cole pushed his cleaning cart down the 7th floor corridor. It was 6:15 on a Friday evening, and most employees had already fled for the weekend, leaving behind the scattered evidence of their corporate existence. Coffee rings on desks, forgotten lunch containers and trash bins, and the lingering scent of ambition mixed with desperation. Ethan paused outside the corner office, checking through the glass wall to confirm it was empty before entering. The nameplate on the door gleamed in the artificial light. Vivian Hale, Senior Vice President of Client Relations. Even her name seemed to carry weight, seemed to demand attention and respect in a way that made people unconsciously straighten their spines when they heard it. He'd worked at Franklin and Meyer for 3 years now, pushing the same cart, emptying the same trash cans, and remaining largely invisible to the people who occupied these spaces during daylight hours. That invisibility suited him fine. He wasn't here to climb ladders or make connections. He was here because the night shift paid 20% more than days, because his daughter Maya needed braces next year, and because the schedule allowed him to drop her off at school every morning and pick her up every afternoon. The corner office smelled faintly of expensive perfume and coffee that probably cost more per cup than Ethan made in an hour. He moved efficiently through the space, having long ago memorized the particular preferences of its occupant. Vivian Hale liked her trash emptied completely, her desk wiped down but nothing moved from its precise position, and her small collection of succulents watered exactly once per week, Fridays, before the weekend. As he reached for the small watering can he kept on the bottom shelf of his cart, Ethan's eyes caught a photograph on Vivian's desk that he'd never noticed before. It showed a younger version of her, maybe 20 years ago, standing with an older woman who shared her sharp cheekbones and determined eyes. They were both laughing at something outside the frame, genuine joy transforming Vivian's face into something almost unrecognizable from the severe executive who stalked these halls. He watered the succulents carefully, remembering the first time he'd done it without asking. The next morning he'd found a sticky note on his cart in aggressive handwriting. "Don't touch the plants." He'd ignored it and watered them again the following Friday. Another note appeared. "I said don't touch them." The third Friday, he'd left his own note. "They were dying. Friday watering schedule established. You're welcome." The notes had stopped after that. The succulents had thrived. And once, just once, he'd caught Vivian Hale watching him through her office window as he pushed his cart past, her expression unreadable. She'd looked away immediately, but he'd seen something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe? Or confusion. As if she couldn't quite categorize a janitor who wrote notes and saved her plants. Ethan finished his rounds on the 7th floor and moved to the elevator, checking his watch. 2 more hours until his shift ended, then the real work began. His weekend gig driving for a rideshare company. The extra money went straight into Maya's college fund, a savings account that grew painfully slowly but represented everything he wanted for his daughter's future. The drive home was quiet, the streets of the city settling into their Friday night rhythm. Ethan lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the east side, in a neighborhood that couldn't decide if it was being gentrified or abandoned. He'd chosen it for the school district, one of the few remaining in the area that still had art and music programs. Maya was still awake when he walked through the door, despite his strict instructions about bedtime. His mother, Patricia, sat in the worn armchair by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly as she watched some reality show with the volume turned low. "She said she couldn't sleep without saying goodnight," Patricia explained, not looking up from her work. "I figured it was better than listening to her protest for another hour." Maya launched herself from the couch, still wearing her school clothes from that morning, a violation of at least 3 house rules. "Daddy, Grandma let me stay up because tomorrow's Saturday and there's no school, and I wanted to show you the picture I drew in art class today." Ethan caught her mid-leap, swinging her up onto his hip, even though she was getting too big for such things. Is that so? And what happened to pajamas by 8 o'clock? Grandma said special occasions require special permissions. Patricia finally looked up, her expression the same one Ethan remembered from his own childhood, a mixture of exasperation and unconditional love. I said no such thing. I said Fridays are different, which is not the same as special occasions at all. Fridays are different, Maya repeated solemnly, as if this explained everything. Ethan carried his daughter to her room, listening as she chattered about her day with the particular intensity of a 7-year-old who had been storing up words for hours. The picture she'd drawn showed a house with a purple roof, a yellow sun, and 3 stick figures holding hands. The tallest one had brown scribbles for hair, the smallest had pigtails, and the middle one, that's Grandma, Maya explained, and that's you, and that's me. Mrs. Patterson said we should draw our families, and I told her our family is small but mighty, just like you always say. Something twisted in Ethan's chest, the familiar ache that came whenever Maya reminded him of everything they'd lost and everything they'd rebuilt. Her mother had left when Maya was 2, walked out on a Tuesday morning, and never looked back. The divorce papers had arrived 6 months later from an address in California, and Ethan had signed them at his kitchen table while Maya napped in the next room, completely unaware that her family was being legally dissolved. Small but mighty, he agreed, tucking the picture onto her corkboard where it joined a constellation of other drawings, certificates, and photographs. Now, pajamas. For real this time. He supervised the bedtime routine with the efficiency of long practice. Teeth brushed, face washed, favorite stuffed rabbit retrieved from under the bed where it had apparently been hiding. Maya settled under her covers, her dark hair fanning across the pillow as she looked up at him with eyes that were entirely her mother's and entirely innocent of understanding why that sometimes made Ethan's breath catch. "Daddy, why do you work so many jobs?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Because I want to make sure you have everything you need. Good school, nice clothes, maybe a trip to Disneyland someday." Carla's dad only works one job and they went to Disneyland last summer. Well, Carla's dad probably has a different kind of job than me. Maya considered this with the serious attention she gave to all important matters. "He wears a tie. You don't wear ties." "That's true. Ties aren't really practical for what I do." "What do you do? I mean, I know you clean the building at night, but what's the other job? The one on weekends?" Ethan smoothed her hair back from her forehead, marveling as he always did at the miracle of her existence. This small, perfect person who somehow managed to make everything worth it. "I drive people places. Like a taxi, but with my own car." "That sounds boring." "Sometimes it is, but sometimes I meet interesting people, hear interesting stories, and it helps us save money for your future." Maya yawned, her eyes already growing heavy. "I don't want you to be tired all the time, Daddy. I'd rather have you than Disneyland." The words hit him somewhere deep, in that place where he kept all the guilt and the fear and the relentless determination to give her better than he'd had. "How about we figure out a way to have both? Deal?" "Deal." He kissed her forehead, turned on her nightlight, and closed the door to the crack she preferred. In the living room, his mother was packing up her knitting, preparing to head home to her own apartment 3 floors down, close enough to help, far enough to maintain independence. "She's getting too smart for her own good," Patricia observed, asking about money and jobs. What happened to questions about butterflies and why the sky is blue? "She's 7, Mom. They grow up. Too fast." Patricia pulled on her cardigan, gathering her things with the particular fussiness of someone who had opinions about the pace of modern life. "You look tired, Ethan. More tired than usual." "End of the week. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running yourself into the ground for that child, and while I admire the dedication, I worry about what happens when you finally break." "I'm not going to break." Patricia paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "That's what your father used to say, right up until his heart attack at 47. She held up a hand to stop his protest. "I'm not trying to upset you. I'm just asking you to be careful. That little girl needs you healthy, not heroic." After she left, Ethan stood in the silence of his apartment, letting her words settle around him like dust. His father had been a construction worker, gone before Ethan turned 20, leaving behind a widow, a mountain of medical debt, and a lesson about the cost of putting everyone else first. Ethan had watched his mother spend 5 years paying off that debt, watched her sacrifice and scrimp, and somehow maintain her dignity through it all. He'd sworn he'd be different. He'd sworn he'd build something sustainable, something that wouldn't consume him from the inside out. But somehow, here he was, 34 years old, working 2 jobs and still barely keeping his head above water. The rideshare app on his phone chimed, reminding him that peak hours were approaching. He changed out of his cleaning uniform into jeans and a clean button-down, grabbed his keys, and headed back out into the night. The first few hours passed in the usual blur of pickups and drop-offs, college students heading to bars, couples going to late dinners, a businessman who spent the entire ride yelling into his phone about some failed deal. Ethan had learned to be invisible in his own car, to offer only the silence and safety his passengers required. By 11 o'clock, the city had settled into its Friday night rhythm. The requests became less frequent, the drives longer as people dispersed to suburbs and neighborhoods on the outskirts. Ethan considered calling it a night. Maya would be up early regardless of weekends, and his body was already protesting the long hours. But the notification that appeared at 11:43 p.m. made him pause. A premium pickup request, which meant the passenger was willing to pay extra for a highly rated driver. The address was in the financial district, just a few blocks from Franklin and Meyer. He accepted the request and watched as the map calculated his route. The destination was a residential area on the west side, an upscale neighborhood where the houses had gates and the driveways held cars that cost more than Ethan's annual salary. Easy money for a 20-minute drive. The pickup location turned out to be a small wine bar tucked between 2 office buildings, its windows glowing amber in the darkness. Ethan pulled up to the curb and sent the standard arrival notification, then settled back to wait. The woman who emerged from the bar 3 minutes later was not what he expected. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone concentrating hard on appearing sober, her steps precise but somehow wrong. Her hair was down around her shoulders, unusual, different from the severe style he was used to seeing. Her coat hung open despite the autumn chill, and she clutched her purse against her chest like a shield. Ethan didn't recognize her immediately. The lighting was poor and he was focused on the practical matters of confirming her identity through the app. It wasn't until she opened the back door and slid into his car that the realization hit him like a physical force. Vivian Hale, his boss, the senior vice president who occupied the corner office he cleaned every Friday, the woman who had demanded he stop watering her plants before silently accepting his routine, the executive whose mere presence in a room could make grown professionals stammer and sweat. She didn't look at him. Her head was turned toward the window, her face half hidden by the shadows inside the car. "Just drive," she said, and her voice was wrong too, raw around the edges, stripped of its usual commanding precision. Ethan pulled away from the curb, his mind racing. The professional thing to do would be to say nothing, to simply complete the ride and maintain the boundary between their 2 worlds. She clearly didn't recognize him. Why would she? He was the nighttime cleaning staff, barely visible even to people who passed him daily. But something in the set of her shoulders, something in the way she kept her face turned away, told him this wasn't just about discretion. Something was wrong. They drove in silence for several blocks, the city lights sliding past like streaks of paint on a dark canvas. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, acutely aware of every sound from the back seat, the rustle of her coat, the unsteady rhythm of her breathing, the small catches that might have been suppressed sobs. "Are you all right?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Vivian's head snapped toward him, and for a moment their eyes met in the rearview mirror. Hers were red-rimmed, swollen, and filled with a kind of desperate fury that made his stomach drop. "Just drive," she repeated. But the command had lost its edge. He drove. The streets grew quieter as they left the downtown area, the buildings giving way to residential neighborhoods with their manicured lawns and security lights. Ethan found himself watching the mirror more than the road, tracking the way Vivian's hands trembled slightly where they gripped her purse, the way she kept reaching up to touch her face, as if checking for damage. When they stopped at a red light, she suddenly spoke again. "I'm fine. In case you were wondering, I'm perfectly fine." Okay. This is just, it's been a difficult night, that's all. I understand. You don't need to worry about me. Ethan didn't respond, just watched the light change and press the accelerator. But his peripheral vision caught the way her composure cracked for a moment, the way her shoulders began to shake before she pressed a hand over her mouth and turned back to the window. The destination was a high-rise apartment building in the kind of neighborhood where doormen wore uniforms and security cameras tracked every movement. Ethan pulled up to the entrance and put the car in park, but didn't unlock the doors immediately. "We're here," he said quietly. Vivian didn't move. She sat frozen in the back seat, staring at the building's entrance as if it represented something terrifying. Through the glass doors, Ethan could see a lobby attendant behind a marble desk, the warm lighting at odds with the cold night outside. "Ms. Hale," he said, and watched her flinch at the recognition. "We've arrived at your destination." She turned to look at him fully for the first time, and what he saw in her face made something twist in his chest. This wasn't the formidable executive who commanded boardrooms and made careers with a single word of approval. This was a woman who had been pushed past some invisible breaking point, whose carefully constructed walls were crumbling in real time. "You know who I am," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "How?" "I work at Franklin and Meyer, night cleaning crew." A bitter laugh escaped her, the kind of sound that carried no humor at all. Of course you do. The one person who sees me like this, and it's someone from the office." "I can forget this ever happened," Ethan offered. "Soon as you're safely inside, this ride never existed." Vivian shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving his face in the mirror. "It doesn't matter. Nothing matters right now." Before Ethan could respond, movement outside the car caught his attention. Two men had emerged from a vehicle parked across the street, a dark sedan that he hadn't noticed when they'd pulled up. They were walking toward his car with the kind of purpose that made his instincts flare with warning. "Who are they?" he asked, his hand moving unconsciously toward the door lock button. Vivian went rigid. The color drained from her face as she looked past him to the approaching figures. No. How did they— "Ms. Hale, who are those men?" "Just drive. Please, drive away. Right now." The men were close enough now that Ethan could make out their faces. Hard, set with determination, and fixed on his car. One of them raised a hand, gesturing for him to lower his window. He didn't drive away. Instead, he pressed the central lock button, ensuring all doors were sealed, and kept the engine running. In the mirror, he watched Vivian's panic escalate, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "It's okay," he said, keeping his voice steady. "They can't get in. The doors are locked." "You don't understand. One of them is—" The man reached the driver's side window and knocked against the glass, not hard enough to be threatening, but insistent. "Open up. We just want to talk to Vivian." "Ms. Hale, do you know these men?" "The one at your window. He was my. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The way she shrank back, the way her hands came up defensively, Ethan had seen enough in his years of driving to recognize the signs. "Are you in danger from them?" I can't." The man knocked again, harder this time. "Vivian, stop being dramatic. We're just going to talk. Tell your driver to unlock the door." Ethan shifted the car into reverse, checked his mirrors, and began to back up slowly. The man stepped aside, surprise crossing his features, then quickly moved to follow. But Ethan had already shifted to drive, pulling around the other man who had positioned himself near the front of the car and accelerating down the street. "What are you doing?" Vivian's voice was high with panic. "This isn't— You can't just— I'm taking you somewhere safe. Is there anyone you can call? Family? Friend? Anyone?" There's no one." The dark sedan appeared in his rear-view mirror, keeping pace but not pursuing aggressively. They knew where she lived. They would simply wait, assuming this was a temporary detour. Ethan made a series of turns, his mind racing through options. He knew the city well from years of driving these streets, the shortcuts, the dead ends, the places where traffic cameras clustered and where they didn't exist at all. "My daughter's grandmother lives in my building," he said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "It's a secure entrance, requires a key card. We can go there while you figure out what to do." "I can't, or I can take you to a police station. But you need to tell me what's happening so I can help you." Vivian was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. The panic was still there, but underneath it was something else. The steely determination he recognized from the rare times he'd heard her address staff meetings through the conference room walls. "His name is Marcus Chen. We were, involved for 2 years. I ended it 3 months ago when I discovered he'd been using our relationship to access confidential client information. He won't accept it's over." Ethan processed this while executing a careful lane change that put 2 other vehicles between his car and the sedan. "Has he hurt you before?" "He wouldn't. It's not like that. He's just persistent, aggressive about wanting to talk. But tonight he brought someone else, and I don't know who that other man is, and I panicked." "Has he shown up at your building before?" "A few times. The doormen usually keep him out, but they don't always ask questions when he says we're together." "What about the police?" A harsh laugh escaped her. "And say what? That my ex-boyfriend wants to have a conversation? There's nothing illegal about being persistent." Ethan took a deep breath, watching the sedan in his mirror. It was still there, maintaining distance but clearly following. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take us to a public place, a 24-hour diner I know, well-lit, plenty of witnesses. You're going to call a friend or a lawyer or someone you trust, and we're going to wait there until those guys give up for the night." Vivian started to protest, then stopped. In the mirror, he watched something shift in her expression, a crack in the armor of denial. "Why are you helping me? You could just drop me off, complete the ride, be done with it. Because you're scared, and no one should have to be scared alone." The diner was a 20-minute drive, and Ethan used every trick he knew to lose the sedan along the way, doubling back through neighborhoods, cutting through a parking garage, finally emerging on a street that ran parallel to the expressway where the late-night traffic provided cover. By the time he pulled into the diner's parking lot, Vivian had composed herself enough to check her appearance in a compact mirror and wipe the mascara smudges from under her eyes. She still looked shaken, but the worst of the panic had faded, replaced by the familiar mask of control. "I don't know how to thank you," she said as Ethan parked the car. "You don't need to thank me. Just let's get inside, okay? Get some coffee. Figure out a plan." The diner was mostly empty at this hour. A few night owls scattered in booths and a tired-looking waitress who didn't bat an eye when Ethan requested a table near the back, away from the windows. He ordered coffee for both of them while Vivian sat in silence, her hands wrapped around the menu she wasn't reading. "You're the one who waters my plants," she said suddenly. Ethan looked up from his phone, where he'd been checking the rideshare app to end the ride and close out the payment. "Yes, ma'am. Fridays, without being asked." They needed water. Nobody else was doing it. A ghost of a smile crossed her face, quickly suppressed. "I was furious, you know. That first note you left. You're welcome. I actually considered filing a complaint." "Why didn't you?" "Because the plants were dying, and you were right, and I'm not good at admitting when I'm wrong." The waitress brought their coffee, and Vivian wrapped her hands around the cup without drinking from it. The warmth seemed to help. Some of the tension left her shoulders, and her breathing steadied. "This isn't how I imagined meeting you," she said. "Assuming I ever imagined meeting you at all, which I'm ashamed to admit I never did. You were just the person who watered the plants, who emptied my trash. I never thought about you as a person with a life outside of that. Most people don't. It's part of the job. That's not an excuse. It's just..." She stopped, shook her head. "I've spent so many years building walls, making sure no one sees me as anything other than completely in control. And now here I am, falling apart in front of the person who cleans my office. It's like a bad joke." "You're not falling apart. You're dealing with a difficult situation. There's a difference." Vivian looked at him then, really looked, and Ethan had the unsettling sensation of being seen for the first time. "You're remarkably calm about all of this. A strange woman gets in your car, has a breakdown, you get chased through the streets by her ex, and you're sitting there drinking coffee like it's a normal Friday night. I have a 7-year-old daughter. This isn't even the most stressful thing that's happened to me this week." The surprise on Vivian's face was almost comical. You have a daughter? Maya, she's the reason I work nights at the building and drive on weekends. Kids are expensive. I didn't know that. I should have known that. Your file probably says. She stopped, looking mortified. I'm sorry. I'm making this worse. I'm not good at this. At what? Being human. Being real. Everyone at work sees this version of me that I've spent decades constructing. The Ice Queen. I know they call me that behind my back. It was intentional. It was necessary. But it means I don't know how to do this. Sit in a diner at midnight and have a normal conversation with someone who's just helped me. Ethan sipped his coffee, giving her space. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and somewhere in the kitchen someone was clanging pots with complete disregard for the hour. Can I tell you something? Vivian asked. Of course. I wasn't at that wine bar for fun. I wasn't celebrating or socializing. I was there because I couldn't face going home to that empty apartment, because the thought of sitting alone in that beautiful building with its doormen and its marble lobby made me want to scream. And then Marcus showed up, with whoever that other person was, and it all just collapsed. How long have you felt that way? About going home? I don't know. Months? Years? It's hard to pinpoint when normal loneliness turned into this crushing isolation. I used to be good at being alone. I used to prefer it. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being a choice and started being a prison. She set her coffee cup down with more force than necessary. And now I'm telling all of this to a stranger, a person who works for me. This is completely inappropriate, and I should stop talking. You're not telling a stranger, Ethan said quietly. You're telling the guy who waters your plants. That's a 3-year relationship, if you count the notes. Vivian stared at him for a moment, then laughed. A real laugh, startled and genuine. 3 years of botanical correspondence. You're right. We're practically old friends. The tension broke, at least partially. Vivian pulled out her phone and began scrolling through contacts, her brow furrowed in concentration. There's a colleague, she said. Sarah. We're not close, but she's solid. She's offered before to help if I ever needed anything. I always turned her down, but call her, tell her what happened, ask if you can stay with her tonight. What about the ride? I've kept you out here for hours, and the fare, I ended the ride when we got to the diner. No charge for the detour. Vivian's face shifted through several expressions. Protest, gratitude, confusion. You can't just, I have to pay you something. You can water your own plants on Monday. Consider us even. The call to Sarah was brief, and within 20 minutes a car had arrived to pick Vivian up. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, she paused at the edge of the booth. Ethan, that's your name, right? From the file I should have read more carefully? Ethan Cole. Ethan Cole. She said it like she was committing it to memory. I don't know what happens next. I don't know how to process any of this. But I want you to know what you did tonight, the way you handled it, the way you treated me like a person instead of a problem. I won't forget it. Get some rest, Ms. Hale. Things always look clearer in the morning. She hesitated, as if there was more she wanted to say. Then she nodded, pulled her coat tight, and walked out to the waiting car. Ethan stayed at the diner for another hour, nursing his cold coffee and watching the parking lot through the window. The dark sedan never appeared. Eventually, the sky began to lighten on the eastern horizon, and he paid his bill and drove home. Maya was still asleep when he checked on her, one arm thrown over her rabbit, her face peaceful in the early morning light. Patricia had left a note on the kitchen counter. Coffee in the pot. Call me when you're human again. He showered, changed, and collapsed into bed. But sleep wouldn't come. He kept replaying the night in his head, Vivian's face in the mirror, the fear in her voice, the way the men had approached the car with such casual menace. He thought about what she'd told him, about the walls she'd built and the loneliness they'd created. And he thought about what Monday would bring, when they would both return to Franklin and Meyer and have to navigate whatever came next. The truth was, he had no idea how any of this would play out. He didn't know if Vivian would acknowledge him at all, if she would pretend the night had never happened, if he'd face consequences for getting involved in something far above his pay grade. He didn't know if Marcus Chen would escalate, if there would be lawyers involved. if the situation would spiral into something worse. What he knew was this: a woman had needed help, and he had helped her. A person had been frightened and alone, and he had stayed until she wasn't anymore. That was enough. That had to be enough. Because sometimes that's what being human looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but simply showing up when someone needed you. Being present when the world felt overwhelming. Offering a locked door and a quiet voice when everything else was chaos. Outside his window, the sun continued its slow climb into the sky. Somewhere across the city, Vivian Hale was waking up in a borrowed bed, facing a day she hadn't expected. And in his small apartment, surrounded by his daughter's artwork and his mother's worried notes, Ethan Cole finally let his eyes close. Whatever came next, it would have to wait. For now, there was only this moment, the weight of exhaustion, the satisfaction of having done the right thing, and the uncertain promise of what Monday morning would bring. The weekend passed in a blur of routine and restlessness. Saturday morning arrived with Maya's inevitable energy, bouncing into Ethan's room at 7 o'clock, despite his desperate need for sleep. She wanted pancakes. She wanted to go to the park. She wanted to know why Daddy looked so tired when he hadn't even done anything yet. Ethan made the pancakes. He took her to the park. He pushed her on the swings until his arms ached and listened to her detailed analysis of which clouds looked like animals and which ones looked like food. And through it all, his mind kept drifting back to Friday night, to the wine bar and the chase through darkened streets, and the woman who had looked at him with such desperate gratitude. Patricia noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You're somewhere else today," she observed when she came up to join them for lunch. Maya had retreated to her room for what she called quiet time, which actually meant playing with her dolls while talking to herself in different voices. "Did something happen at work?" "Nothing happened at work." "Then something happened somewhere else." "You've got that look." "What look?" "The look you get when you're carrying something heavy and trying to pretend you're not. Same look your father used to get." She poured herself a cup of tea and sat across from him at the small kitchen table. "I'm not going to pry, but I'm here if you need to talk." Ethan considered telling her. The words formed in his mind, arranged themselves into sentences, and then dissolved before they could reach his lips. What would he even say? That he'd driven his boss home from a bar, that she'd cried in his back seat, that he'd helped her escape from men who might or might not have been dangerous? It sounded like something from a bad movie. "I helped someone," he finally said. "Someone from the office. They were in a bad situation, and I helped them get somewhere safe." Patricia studied him over the rim of her teacup. "And now you're worried about what happens next." "I don't know what happens next. That's the problem." "Does this person know who you are? What you do at the company?" "She does now." His mother's eyebrows rose slightly at the pronoun, but she didn't comment on it directly. "Well, in my experience, people either remember kindness or they don't. There's not much you can do to influence which type they are. You did the right thing, and that's what matters." "What if doing the right thing costs me my job?" "Then you find another job. You've done it before. You're good at landing on your feet." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow. It's got enough of its own." Sunday was quieter. Ethan took Maya to her weekly art class, sat in the waiting area with the other parents, and tried to focus on the book he'd brought instead of the spiraling thoughts in his head. When Maya emerged with a painted ceramic bowl that she declared was for keeping her most important treasures, he managed to summon genuine enthusiasm. That night, after Maya was asleep and the apartment had settled into silence, Ethan sat on his couch and stared at his phone. No messages, no missed calls, no indication that Friday night had been anything other than a strange dream. He didn't know what he'd expected. A text, maybe. An email through the company's system, some acknowledgement that the night had happened and that they would have to figure out how to move forward. But there was nothing. Just silence and uncertainty and the slow tick of hours until Monday morning. He arrived at Franklin and Meyer at his usual time, 6 p.m., and began his usual routine. The building was quieter than normal for a Monday, most employees having cleared out early after what was apparently a stressful day of meetings. Ethan pushed his cart through the familiar corridors, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces with mechanical precision. When he reached the 7th floor, he hesitated. The corner office was dark, its occupant apparently gone for the day. He felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment as he let himself in and began his routine, carefully avoiding looking at the desk where they'd exchanged notes, at the succulents that were thriving under his care, at all the small details that now carried weight they hadn't before. He was halfway through emptying the trash when the office door opened behind him. Vivian Hale stood in the doorway, still wearing her work clothes, her bag slung over one shoulder. She looked different than she had Friday night, more composed, more controlled, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, something softer around the edges. "You're here," she said. "I work here." "I know. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I wanted to catch you before you finished and moved on." Ethan set down his cleaning supplies and straightened, acutely aware of the contrast between them. She in her designer suit and expensive shoes, him in his uniform with its embroidered name patch. Two people from different worlds standing in the same room with the events of Friday night stretching between them like a bridge. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Better. I stayed with Sarah through the weekend, had some difficult conversations with some difficult people." She set her bag down on the chair and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "Marcus won't be a problem anymore. I have a lawyer involved now, and he's been warned about the consequences of any further contact." "That's good. That's the right move." "I should have done it months ago. Should have done a lot of things months ago." She turned back to face him. "I've been thinking about Friday night, about what you did. You don't need to... Please, let me say this." She took a breath, and Ethan could see the effort it cost her to maintain her composure. "I've built my entire career on being strong. On being the person who handles everything, who never needs help, who never shows weakness. And in one night, you saw me at my absolute worst. You saw me scared and crying and completely out of control. I saw you being human. That's not the same as being weak." Something flickered across her face, an emotion he couldn't quite identify. "That's what Sarah said. Almost exactly. She said that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. That the people who try to do everything alone are usually the ones who break first." She laughed softly, without humor. "I've spent 30 years building walls, and it took a janitor and a car chase to show me what they were actually costing me." Ethan didn't respond to the word janitor. It wasn't meant as an insult, he could tell. It was just the reality of their situation, the gap between their worlds that Friday night had somehow bridged. "I don't want anything from you," he said carefully. "I didn't help you because I expected something in return. I helped because you needed help. That's it." "I know. That's what makes it so..." She stopped, shook her head. "I'm not explaining this well. I had a whole speech prepared, and now that I'm standing here, it all sounds wrong." "Then don't make a speech. Just say what you mean." Vivian looked at him for a long moment, and then the mask she'd been wearing seemed to crack. Not dramatically, not like Friday night, but enough for him to see the person underneath. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry that for 3 years you've been coming into this office and keeping my plants alive, and I never once asked your name. I'm sorry that I walked past you in the hallways without seeing you. I'm sorry that I've built a culture here where people like you are invisible, where the only people who matter are the ones in suits." "Ms. Hale." "Vivian, please. After everything, I think you've earned the right to use my name." "Vivian." The name felt strange on his tongue, too intimate for the distance between them. "You don't need to apologize for any of that. You're running a department, dealing with clients and deadlines and all the things that come with your position. You can't be expected to know everyone who works in the building." "But I should be. That's what I'm realizing. All those walls I built, all that distance I created, it didn't make me stronger. It made me alone. It made me the kind of person who has no one to call at midnight when everything falls apart." She walked to her desk and picked up one of the succulents, turning it in her hands. "You know what I thought when I found out you'd been watering these? I thought, who does this person think they are? Coming into my space, touching my things, acting like they know what's best. I was furious." "I remember the notes." "The notes! God, those notes!" She set the plant back down with exaggerated care. "And then I watched them grow, watched them thrive, and I realized something. You weren't doing it to challenge me or to prove a point. You were doing it because it needed to be done, and no one else was going to do it. You saw a problem, and you fixed it without asking permission or expecting recognition. That's That's integrity. That's the kind of person you are. And Friday night, when you could have just dropped me off and driven away, you didn't. You saw a problem and you fixed it, again. The weight of her words settled around them, and Ethan found himself uncertain how to respond. This wasn't a conversation he'd prepared for, wasn't a situation his experience had equipped him to navigate. He was a night janitor and a weekend driver, a single father trying to keep his head above water. He wasn't equipped for this kind of emotional complexity. "I have a daughter," he said finally. "Maya, she's 7. Everything I do for her. The night shifts, the driving, all of it. I'm trying to build something for her future, to give her opportunities I didn't have." Vivian nodded slowly. "You mentioned her, Friday night at the diner. You said she was the reason you work so much." "She's the reason I do everything. And what I've learned, being her father, is that the only thing that matters is showing up. Being there when someone needs you. Everything else, the titles, the money, the status, none of it means anything if you're not there for the people who count on you." Is that what you think I've forgotten? How to be there for people? "I think you've been so focused on building walls that you forgot what you were protecting." The words hung in the air between them, sharper than he'd intended. He saw Vivian flinch slightly, saw the truth of it register in her eyes. "You're right," she said quietly. "That's exactly what happened. I was so afraid of being hurt, of being seen as weak, that I pushed everyone away. And now I'm 47 years old with a corner office and an empty apartment and not a single person I can really talk to." "That's not true. You talked to Sarah. You talked to me. Under duress, that's different. Is it? You made a choice to trust her with what happened. You made a choice to come here tonight and say these things. That's not duress. That's courage." Vivian set down the succulent and turned to face him fully. In the dim light of the office, with the city glowing through the windows behind her, she looked less like an executive and more like a person. Just a person, with fears and hopes and all the complicated emotions that came with being human. "I want to make some changes," she said. "Not just personal changes, but changes here, in this department, in how I lead." "What kind of changes?" "I don't know yet. Something that makes people feel seen, something that acknowledges the fact that everyone who works in this building, whether they're in the boardroom or pushing a cleaning cart, is a person with a life and a family and dreams of their own." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't expected. "That sounds like a good start." "It's going to take time. I've spent decades building this reputation, and I can't change it overnight, but I want to try. I need to try." She met his eyes with an intensity that made him want to look away. "And I want to thank you, not just for Friday night, but for everything. For watering the plants and leaving notes and refusing to let me pretend you didn't exist." "You're welcome." "That's it? Just, you're welcome?" "What do you want me to say?" Vivian laughed, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. "I don't know, something profound, something that sums up this entire bizarre situation." "How about this? Monday's over. Go home and get some rest. Things always look clearer after a good night's sleep. You said that Friday night, at the diner. It's still true." She gathered her bag and moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "Ethan, that's your name, right? Ethan Cole?" "That's me. Ethan Cole. The man who waters plants and drives cars and helps people he doesn't have to help." She smiled, and it transformed her face in a way that reminded him of the photograph on her desk, the one where she was laughing with her mother. "I won't forget this. Any of it." After she left, Ethan stood alone in the corner office for a long moment, letting the silence settle around him. Through the windows, he could see the lights of the city stretching toward the horizon, thousands of lives unfolding in parallel, each one carrying its own weight of joy and sorrow. He thought about his daughter, asleep in her bed with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. He thought about his mother, 3 floors down, knitting and worrying and loving him in her own way. He thought about all the choices that had led him to this moment, to this strange intersection of lives that had no business intersecting. And he thought about Vivian Hale, walking out of the building toward whatever came next, carrying the weight of her own revelations and the fragile hope of change. The next few weeks unfolded in ways that Ethan hadn't anticipated. Nothing dramatic happened, no sudden announcements or grand gestures. But there were small shifts, subtle changes that accumulated like drops of water wearing away at stone. He noticed them first in the cleaning staff. Word spread, as it always did in workplaces, that something had changed on the 7th floor. The corner office was still intimidating, Ms. Hale was still formidable, but there was something different in the air. People talked about it in the break room, exchanged theories in the loading dock, wondered what could have caused the Ice Queen to thaw. Ethan kept silent about his role in whatever was happening. It wasn't his story to tell, and he had no interest in becoming the subject of workplace gossip. He continued his routine, pushing his cart through the corridors, maintaining his invisibility with practiced ease. But he noticed the changes. Small things, at first. A nod of acknowledgement when Vivian passed him in the hallway, brief but unmistakable. A note on her desk one Friday that said simply, "Plants look good, thank you," with a reduction in the tension that used to radiate from her office like heat from a fire. The bigger changes came later. An email went out to all staff announcing a review of company policies around work-life balance. Another announced the creation of the employee recognition program that included non-management staff for the first time. A third mentioned improvements to the cleaning staff break room, including new furniture and a coffee machine that actually worked. People noticed. They talked. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the culture of the 7th floor began to shift. Ethan watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. He wasn't sure what his role was supposed to be in this new landscape, whether he should acknowledge the changes or pretend they were unconnected to that Friday night. In the end, he chose to do what he always did. He showed up, did his work, and trusted that things would unfold as they were meant to. It was 3 weeks after that night in the wine bar when Vivian sought him out again. This time, she found him in the break room on the ground floor, eating the sandwich he'd brought from home and reading a paperback novel that Maya had recommended from her school library. "The cleaning staff has its own break room now," she said, leaning against the door frame. "With better chairs, I'm told." Ethan looked up from his book. "I heard. The coffee machine is a nice touch." "It seemed like the least I could do." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Do you have a few minutes?" "My break's not over for another 10. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her posture uncharacteristically uncertain. She was dressed more casually than he was used to seeing her blazer replaced by a simple cardigan, her hair slightly looser around her face. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "about showing up for the people who count on you, about walls and what they cost." "Okay." "And I've been trying to do better, to be present, to connect, to actually see the people around me. Sarah says I'm making progress, but it's hard to know from the inside." "What does it feel like from the inside?" Vivian considered the question seriously. "Terrifying. Like walking without a net. Every interaction feels risky, like I might say the wrong thing, or reveal too much, or somehow lose the ground I've spent decades building." "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it's also—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Alive. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm actually living instead of just performing." Ethan set down his sandwich and gave her his full attention. "That's good. That's progress." "Is it? I can't tell anymore. I used to be so sure about everything, what I wanted, who I was, how the world worked. Now I question all of it." "Maybe that's the point. Maybe certainty was the problem." Vivian laughed softly. "When did you become so wise? Is this what happens when you spend years cleaning offices and listening to other people's conversations?" "Something like that. You learn a lot about people when they think you're not there." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the building filling the space between them. It was strange, Ethan thought, how much had changed since that Friday night, and how much had stayed the same. They were still who they'd always been, occupying different levels of the same hierarchy, but something had shifted in the way they saw each other, a recognition that transcended job titles and social expectations. "I have a proposition for you," Vivian said finally. Ethan's guard went up immediately. "What kind of proposition?" "Not like that." She must have read his expression because she held up her hands in a gesture of reassurance. "It's professional, completely professional." "I'm listening." "There's a position opening up in my department. Administrative support, mostly. scheduling, coordination, that kind of thing. The hours are reasonable. The pay is significantly better than what you're making now. And there's a benefits package that includes health insurance and retirement contributions. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken, though he kept his face neutral. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you an opportunity. You'd have to apply through the normal channels, interview with HR, all of that. But I wanted you to know it was available in case you were interested. Why me? You must have dozens of qualified candidates for something like that. Vivian leaned forward, her expression earnest. Because I've seen how you work. I've seen your attention to detail, your reliability, the way you notice things other people miss. And because I trust you, which is not something I say lightly. This isn't about Friday night, is it? Because I didn't help you expecting... I know. That's exactly why I'm offering. Because you didn't expect anything, and you helped anyway. Because you're the kind of person who fixes problems without asking for recognition. She sat back. I'm not trying to repay a debt. I'm trying to build a team of people I can actually rely on. You'd be an asset regardless of our history. Ethan's mind raced through the implications. Better pay, regular hours, the chance to be home for Maya's bedtime instead of leaving for work when she should be asleep. No more weekend driving, no more running himself ragged, trying to make ends meet. It was everything he'd been working toward, handed to him on a silver platter. And yet, what happens to my current position? The cleaning crew? Vivian frowned slightly. What do you mean? I mean, if I move up, someone has to fill my spot. And the people I work with now, they're good people. They rely on each other. I don't want to leave them in a lurch. Something in Vivian's expression softened. That's why you'd be good at this job, because you think about things like that. Most people would just take the opportunity and not look back. I'm not most people. No, you're not. She stood, smoothing her cardigan. The posting goes live next week. Think about it. Talk to your family. And let me know if you have any questions. She was halfway to the door when Ethan spoke again. Vivian. She turned, and he saw again that crack in her armor, the vulnerability she was learning to let show. Thank you for thinking of me, regardless of what I decide. You're welcome, Ethan, regardless of what you decide. After she left, Ethan sat alone in the break room, his sandwich forgotten, his mind churning with possibilities. He thought about Maya, about what this could mean for her future. He thought about his mother, about the worry she carried for him, and the relief this could bring. He thought about his father, who had worked himself to death without ever getting a chance at something better. And he thought about Vivian Hale, who had looked at him and seen not just a janitor, but a person worth investing in. That night, he told his mother about the opportunity. She listened in silence, her knitting needles still for once, and when he finished, she reached over and took his hand. What are you afraid of? She asked. I don't know. Everything, maybe. That it's too good to be true. That I'm not qualified. That I'll fail and end up worse off than I am now. Those are all fears about the future. What about the present? What does your gut tell you? Ethan thought about it, really thought about it, and found his answer in the quiet certainty that had guided him through so many difficult decisions. It tells me to try, to take the risk and see what happens. Patricia squeezed his hand. Then try. You've spent years playing it safe, building security for Maya. Maybe it's time to build something for yourself too. The next morning, Ethan submitted his application for the administrative support position on the 7th floor. He updated his resume for the first time in years, drafted a cover letter that felt simultaneously too formal and not formal enough, and hit submit before he could talk himself out of it. Then he went about his day, dropping Maya at school, running errands, preparing for his cleaning shift with the same careful attention he always gave to his work. Whatever happened next, he told himself, he would face it the same way he'd faced everything else, one step at a time, with integrity and determination. The interview was scheduled for the following week. When the calendar notification appeared on his phone, Ethan stared at it for a long moment, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope. Whatever came next, there was no going back now. He had stepped out of the shadows, and the light was both terrifying and beautiful. The morning of the interview arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind that turned city streets into rivers and made umbrellas useless against the sideways assault. Ethan stood in front of his closet at 6 in the morning, staring at the 3 dress shirts he owned, as if one of them might suddenly transform into the perfect outfit for a job that could change his entire life. Maya appeared in his doorway, still in her pajamas, her hair a wild tangle from sleep. "Daddy, why are you up so early? It's Saturday." "It's Thursday, sweetheart. You have school today." "Oh." She rubbed her eyes and padded over to stand beside him. "Why are you looking at your shirts like they did something wrong?" "I have an important meeting today. I'm trying to figure out what to wear." Maya studied the options with the serious attention she gave to all matters of importance. "The blue one. It matches your eyes." "I didn't know you paid attention to things like that." "Mrs. Patterson says details matter. She says that's what makes good art, noticing the little things." Maya reached up and touched the sleeve of the blue shirt. "This one makes you look like a dad in a movie, the kind who saves people." Something tightened in Ethan's chest. "What kind of dads save people in movies?" "The good ones, the ones who show up when someone needs help." She looked up at him with those eyes that saw too much for 7 years old. "You're that kind of dad, right?" "I try to be." "Then wear the blue shirt, and don't forget to smile. You look scary when you don't smile." He wore the blue shirt. He also wore the only tie he owned, a navy stripe that his mother had given him for job interviews years ago, and the dress shoes that pinched his feet but looked professional enough to pass inspection. When he checked himself in the bathroom mirror, he saw a stranger looking back, someone who might belong in an office instead of pushing a cleaning cart. Patricia arrived at 7:30 to take Maya to school, her eyes widening slightly when she saw Ethan's transformation. "Well, don't you clean up nice?" "Don't make a big deal out of it." "I'm not making a deal of any size. I'm simply observing that my son looks like a respectable adult for once." She straightened his tie with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "Your father used to hate ties too, said they felt like nooses." "That's comforting." "He also said they were worth wearing for the right reasons." She stepped back and studied him with maternal scrutiny. "This is the right reason, Ethan. Whatever happens today, remember that." The bus ride to Franklin and Meyer felt different in daylight hours, surrounded by commuters instead of night shift workers, everyone clutching their coffees and phones like talismans against the Monday morning blues. Ethan stood near the back, watching the city slide past through rain-streaked windows, trying to calm the nervous energy that made his hands want to shake. He arrived at the building 45 minutes before his scheduled interview, which meant 45 minutes of sitting in the lobby pretending to be calm while his stomach did gymnastics. The security guard at the front desk, a man named Jerome, who Ethan had shared countless late-night conversations with, did a visible double-take when he saw him. "Cole? That you under that tie?" "In the flesh." "What's the occasion? You winning an award or something?" "Job interview, 7th floor." Jerome's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "7th floor? That's Hale territory. You sure you want to walk into that lion's den voluntarily?" "I've been walking into that lion's den for 3 years. This is just a different kind of walking." "Fair enough." Jerome leaned forward conspiratorially. "Word of advice? Don't let them see you sweat. Those corporate types can smell fear." The elevator ride to the 7th floor was the longest of Ethan's life. He watched the numbers climb, each one bringing him closer to a moment that could define the next chapter of his story. By the time the doors opened onto the familiar corridor, his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. Everything looked different in daylight. The walls were the same, the carpet was the same, the nameplates on the doors were the same. But the energy was transformed, filled with the bustle and buzz of people actually working, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, conversations overlapping in the controlled chaos of corporate life. He checked in with the receptionist, a young woman named Tanya, who he recognized from his cleaning rounds but who clearly didn't recognize him. She directed him to a waiting area outside the HR department, where 3 other candidates were already seated, all of them looking as nervous as he felt. The first candidate was a young man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone and sighing loudly. The second was a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and a portfolio clutched to her chest like a shield. The third was another young woman, fresh-faced and eager, who kept bouncing her knee in a rhythm that suggested caffeine or anxiety or both. None of them looked at Ethan. None of them seemed to register his presence at all. He was invisible again, just in a different way. Not the janitor in the corner, but the candidate who didn't quite fit the mold. The expensive suit went first. He emerged from the interview room 20 minutes later looking smug and satisfied, flashing a thumbs up to no one in particular as he strode toward the elevator. The silver-haired woman went next, and she came out looking thoughtful and measured. The eager young woman bounced in and bounced out, her energy apparently inexhaustible. Then it was Ethan's turn. The interview room was smaller than he expected, just a table and 4 chairs arranged under harsh fluorescent lights. 2 people sat on one side, a middle-aged man in HR that Ethan had never seen, and, surprisingly, Vivian Hale herself, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Cole," the HR man said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Please, have a seat. I'm David Chen, head of Human Resources, and I believe you're already acquainted with Ms. Hale." "We've met," Ethan said, settling into the chair and resisting the urge to wipe his palms on his pants. David Chen opened a folder and studied its contents with the theatrical seriousness of someone who wanted you to know they were taking this seriously. "Your resume is interesting. 3 years in building maintenance, before that a series of positions in logistics and customer service. No direct administrative experience." "That's correct." "And yet you've applied for a position that requires significant organizational skills, attention to detail, and the ability to manage complex schedules. What makes you think you're qualified?" Ethan had prepared for this question, had rehearsed his answer in front of his bathroom mirror until it sounded natural. But sitting here, under the fluorescent lights with Vivian's eyes on him, the prepared words seemed hollow. "Can I be honest with you?" David Chen's eyebrows rose. "Please." "On paper, I'm probably not your strongest candidate. I don't have a college degree. I don't have experience in corporate administration. I don't know the software you use or the protocols you follow." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I've spent 3 years learning every inch of this building. I know which conference rooms have outlets that don't work. I know which supply closets are always running low. I know the names of the security guards and the cleaning staff and the people who show up at midnight to finish projects that were supposed to be done at 5. And how does that qualify you for this position? Because administration isn't just about managing calendars and sending emails. It's about understanding how an organization actually works, not how it's supposed to work on paper. It's about noticing the things other people miss and fixing problems before they become crises." He met David Chen's eyes directly. "I may not have the traditional qualifications, but I've been doing that work for 3 years. The only difference is now I'd be doing it in a different capacity." Silence fell over the room. David Chen made a note on his folder, his expression unreadable. Vivian sat perfectly still, watching Ethan with an intensity that made him want to look away. "Tell me about a time you solved a problem that wasn't your responsibility to solve," she said, speaking for the first time since the interview began. Ethan felt a small smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "There was this executive on the 7th floor. She had some succulents in her office that were dying. Nobody was supposed to touch them, but I started watering them anyway. Left notes when she complained. Eventually, she stopped complaining." Something flickered in Vivian's eyes, a ghost of the connection they'd shared in those late-night conversations. "And what did you learn from that experience?" "That sometimes the right thing to do isn't the same as the expected thing to do. That people will resist help even when they need it, and that persistence matters more than permission when something genuinely needs to be fixed." David Chen cleared his throat, looking between them with the confused expression of someone who sensed there was a subtext he wasn't privy to. "Well, that's certainly a unique perspective. Do you have any questions for us?" Ethan had prepared questions too, generic things about job responsibilities and growth opportunities. But what came out of his mouth was something different entirely. "If I get this job, what happens to my position on the cleaning crew? I've worked with those people for 3 years. I don't want to leave them understaffed." David Chen blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "The night cleaning crew. If I take a day position, you'll need to fill my spot. I want to make sure there's a plan for that, so my colleagues aren't stuck picking up extra work without extra compensation." For a long moment, no one spoke. David Chen looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Ethan. And Ethan sat there, wondering if he'd just torpedoed his chances by asking a question that no other candidate would ever think to ask. That's not something candidates typically inquire about. David Chen finally said. Maybe not, but those are real people who depend on that income. They're not interchangeable parts that can be swapped out without consequence. If this company values its employees, that should include all of them, not just the ones who wear suits. Another silence. Ethan could feel his opportunity slipping away, could sense that he'd pushed too hard, asked too much. This was why he didn't belong in this world, why he should have stayed in the shadows where he understood the rules. But then Vivian spoke. Mr. Chen, I think we have everything we need for now. Thank you, Mr. Cole. We'll be in touch. The dismissal was clear, and Ethan rose from his chair with as much dignity as he could muster. He was halfway to the door when Vivian's voice stopped him. Mr. Cole. He turned. That was a good question, about the cleaning crew. She held his gaze for a moment that stretched into something meaningful. We'll make sure there's a plan. He nodded once and walked out, his heart still pounding but his head held high. Whatever happened next, he had said what he needed to say. He had been himself, not the version of himself that might have been more palatable. And that would have to be enough. The wait that followed was excruciating. 2 days passed with no word, then 3, then 4. Ethan continued his night shifts, pushing his cart through the same corridors, cleaning the same offices, maintaining his routine while his mind churned with speculation. He didn't see Vivian during those shifts. Her office was dark when he arrived, empty when he cleaned it. The succulents still needed watering, and he watered them, but the ritual felt different now, weighted with uncertainty about whether it would continue. Maya noticed his distraction. You're doing that thing again, she announced at dinner on the 5th day, pointing her fork at him accusingly. What thing? The thing where you're here, but you're not really here, like your body is at the table, but your brain is somewhere else. I'm right here, sweetheart. See? Eating my spaghetti just like you. But you're thinking about something that makes you make that face. What face? The worried face. The one you make when you think I can't see. She twirled her pasta with exaggerated care. Is it about the meeting? The one you wore the blue shirt for? Ethan set down his fork, marveling once again at his daughter's perceptiveness. Yes, I'm waiting to find out if they want to give me the job. How long do you have to wait? I don't know. These things take time. That's dumb. If they like you, they should just tell you. If they don't like you, they should tell you that too. Making people wait is mean. The world isn't always straightforward, Maya. Sometimes things are complicated. That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to explain something. She fixed him with a look that was pure Patricia. Do you think they liked you? I think I was honest with them. Whether they liked that honesty? I don't know. Being honest is always the right thing. That's what you tell me. It is. But sometimes the right thing doesn't get you the result you want. Maya considered this with the serious attention she gave to all philosophical questions. So being good doesn't always mean winning? No, sweetheart, it doesn't. Then why bother being good? The question hung in the air between them, and Ethan found himself struggling for an answer. This was the kind of moment parenthood hadn't prepared him for, the kind of question that required wisdom he wasn't sure he possessed. Because being good isn't about winning, he said finally. It's about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and like what you see. It's about building the kind of life you can be proud of, even when things don't go your way. That sounds hard. It is hard, but it's worth it. Maya nodded slowly, processing this information with the methodical thoroughness of a 7-year-old philosopher. I think they'll give you the job, she said finally. Yeah? Why's that? Because you're a good person, and even if good people don't always win, they should. And if the world was fair, you'd get everything you deserve. Ethan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart, Daddy. You just don't always notice because you're busy thinking about grown-up stuff. The call came on day 6. Ethan was in the middle of his shift, emptying the trash cans on the 4th floor when his phone buzzed in his pocket. The number was internal, originating from somewhere within the Franklin and Myers system. Mr. Cole, this is David Chen from Human Resources. Mr. Chen. Ethan stepped into an empty conference room and closed the door, his heart suddenly racing. What can I do for you? I'm calling to inform you that after careful consideration, we'd like to offer you the position of Administrative Coordinator for the Client Relations Department. The words seemed to float in the air, refusing to settle into something real. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? You got the job, Mr. Cole. Congratulations. Ethan leaned against the conference table, his legs suddenly unsteady. Thank you. I don't know what to say. You can say yes, David Chen replied, and there was warmth in his voice that hadn't been there during the interview. The official offer letter will be in your email by morning. Take the weekend to review the terms and let us know your decision by Monday. But between you and me, I hope you'll accept. Your interview left quite an impression. On you or on Ms. Hale? A brief pause. On both of us, though I suspect for different reasons. He cleared his throat. Welcome to the team, Mr. Cole, assuming you accept. After the call ended, Ethan stood alone in the empty conference room, staring at his phone as if it might reveal the secret to what had just happened. He'd done it. Against all odds, against all conventional wisdom, he'd somehow convinced them to take a chance on a janitor with no formal qualifications. His first call was to his mother. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. Ethan, is everything all right? You never call during your shift. I got the job, Mom. Silence. Then a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or something in between. Oh, Ethan. Oh, my boy. Tell me everything. He told her what he could, which wasn't much. The details were still fuzzy, the reality still settling into something he could grasp. But his mother's joy was infectious, her pride radiating through the phone like warmth from a fire. Your father would be so proud, she said, and the words made his eyes sting. He always knew you were meant for more than they let you have. He always said you just needed the right door to open. I found the door, Mom. Now I just have to walk through it. You will. You've been walking through doors your whole life, even when they looked like walls. When his shift ended, Ethan drove home through the early morning darkness with a strange lightness in his chest. Everything looked different somehow. The same streets he'd driven 1,000 times, now transformed into something new. He felt like a man who'd been given a second chance, a fresh start, a reason to hope for things he'd stopped allowing himself to hope for. Maya was still asleep when he checked on her, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight against her chest. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, thinking about all the ways her life was about to change. Better hours meant more time with her. Better pay meant more opportunities, more security, a future that wasn't just about survival. He could take her to Disneyland now, for real, not just as an abstract promise. He could be there for her bedtime stories instead of rushing out to work. He could be the father he'd always wanted to be, but never quite had the resources to become. He didn't sleep that night. He sat on his couch in the pre-dawn quiet and watched the city slowly come to life, the sky shifting from black to gray to the pale pink of sunrise. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he let himself feel something he'd been afraid to feel. Hope. The transition from night janitor to administrative coordinator took 2 weeks to finalize. There were papers to sign, training sessions to complete, protocols to learn, and a wardrobe to acquire. Patricia took him shopping for dress clothes, declaring his existing collection adequate for funerals but not for success. Maya helped him pick out ties, applying her 7-year-old aesthetic to the selection process with absolute seriousness. His last night on the cleaning crew was bittersweet. His colleagues threw him a small party in the break room, the one with the new coffee machine that Vivian had arranged. They gave him a card signed by everyone on the night shift, the messages ranging from sincere congratulations to jokes about him forgetting where he came from. Jerome, the security guard, pulled him aside before he left. You done good, Cole. Not many people make the jump from our world to theirs. Don't let them change who you are. I won't. I mean it. I've seen it happen. People get a taste of the corner office life and forget what it felt like to be invisible. Don't be that guy. I could never forget, Jerome. This place, these people, it's part of who I am. Good, because we're all watching. He grinned. No pressure. Ethan's first day in his new role arrived on a Monday morning in early November. He wore the blue shirt Maya had chosen for his interview, the tie Patricia had adjusted, and the new shoes that didn't pinch quite as much as his old ones. He took the same bus, walked through the same lobby, rode the same elevator to the 7th floor. But everything was different. Tanya, the receptionist who hadn't recognized him weeks earlier, now greeted him by name. David Chen from HR stopped by his new desk to welcome him officially. Colleagues he'd never spoken to introduced themselves with handshakes and pleasantries. And then there was Vivian. She appeared at his desk around mid-morning, a stack of folders in her arms and an expression on her face that balanced professionalism with something warmer underneath. "Mr. Cole, welcome to the team." "Ms. Hale, thank you for the opportunity. Let's walk and talk. I want to show you something." She led him through the corridors of the 7th floor, past conference rooms and corner offices and the bustling energy of a department in full swing. People acknowledged her as she passed, some with genuine warmth, others with the nervous respect that power tends to inspire. But there was something different in the way they looked at her now, something softer. "You notice it too," Vivian said, as if reading his thoughts. "The change. It's hard to miss. It started after that night, after everything that happened." She paused at a window overlooking the city, her reflection ghosted against the glass. "I realized that the walls I'd built weren't protecting me. They were isolating me, and isolation isn't the same as strength." "What did you do?" "Small things at first, saying good morning to people, asking about their weekends, remembering that they have lives outside these walls." She turned to face him. It sounds simple, but for someone who spent decades avoiding connection, it felt revolutionary. "And now?" "Now I'm learning. Slowly. Imperfectly. But learning." She started walking again, leading him toward a corner of the floor he'd never explored during his cleaning rounds. "This is your domain now. Scheduling, coordination, logistics, everything that keeps this department running smoothly. It's a lot of responsibility. You're ready for it. I've seen how you work, how you think. You notice things other people miss." She stopped at a door marked with his name on an actual office door, and pushed it open. "This is you." The office was small but functional, with a desk, a computer, and a window that looked out over the city. It wasn't a corner office, wasn't anything close to the executive suites on this floor. But it was his. "I don't know how to thank you," Ethan said. "Then don't. Just do the job. That's all I ask." She was almost out the door when he spoke again. "Vivian." She turned. "That night at the diner, you asked me why I helped you. I said it was because you needed help, and no one should be alone when they're scared." "I remember." That wasn't the whole truth. He met her eyes, willing himself not to look away. "I helped because I recognized something in you, something I see in myself. The exhaustion of carrying everything alone, the fear that if you ask for help, you'll be admitting you're not strong enough." Vivian said nothing, but something shifted in her expression. "We're not so different, you and me. Different circumstances, different positions, but the same struggle." He gestured at the office around them. "This opportunity you've given me, it's not just a job. It's a chance to build something better for my daughter, and I won't waste it." "I know you won't." Her voice was soft now, stripped of its executive formality. "That's why I hired you." She left him standing in his new office, the city spread out below him like a promise. Somewhere out there, Maya was at school, learning her letters and numbers, and preparing for a future that had just gotten a little bit brighter. Somewhere out there, Patricia was knitting in her apartment, probably already planning a celebration dinner. And here he was, Ethan Cole, former janitor, current administrative coordinator, standing in an office with his name on the door and the weight of possibility resting on his shoulders. The fear was still there, the doubt, the uncertainty, the voice in his head that whispered he didn't belong here. But underneath it all was something stronger, the knowledge that he'd earned this moment. Not through connections or credentials, but through the simple act of showing up, day after day, and doing what needed to be done. He sat down at his new desk, powered on his computer, and began to learn the first of many things he would need to know. The journey was just beginning, and he was ready to take the next step. The first month in his new position taught Ethan more about corporate culture than 3 years of cleaning offices ever had. He learned that meetings could have been emails, that emails could have been nothing at all, and that the phrase "circle back" meant something would probably never happen. He learned which coffee mugs belonged to which executives, and that using someone else's mug was tantamount to declaring war. He learned that the seventh floor had its own ecosystem, its own rules, its own invisible hierarchies that had nothing to do with the organizational chart on the wall. But more than anything, he learned that he was good at this job. The skills he'd developed during years of night shifts translated surprisingly well to administrative work. His attention to detail, honed by tracking which offices needed attention and which could wait, now helped him manage complex scheduling conflicts. His ability to remain invisible and observant, to notice things others missed, made him invaluable for anticipating problems before they exploded. His patience, built through endless repetitive tasks and difficult interactions, served him well when dealing with demanding clients and stressed colleagues. Sarah Winters, the colleague who had sheltered Vivian on that fateful Friday night, became something of a mentor to him. She was a senior account manager with 15 years at the company, a woman who had seen executives come and go and who possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of how things actually got done. The secret, she told him over coffee in the break room during his second week, is understanding that this place runs on two tracks. There's the official track, which is org charts and protocols and proper channels. And then there's the real track, which is relationships and favors and knowing who to call when something needs to happen fast. How do you learn the real track? Time, observation, and having someone willing to show you the shortcuts. She sipped her coffee with the satisfaction of someone sharing hard-won wisdom. You've got an advantage most new people don't have. You already know the building, know the rhythms of this place. You just need to learn the people. I thought I knew them. But seeing them during the day is completely different from seeing them at night. Of course it is. At night they're relaxed. Their guards are down. They're just people trying to finish their work and go home. Sarah set down her mug. During the day they're performing. Everyone's performing all the time. The trick is figuring out who they really are underneath the performance. Ethan thought about Vivian, about the woman he'd met on that rainy Friday night versus the executive who commanded the corner office. Two versions of the same person, separated by walls of professionalism and self-protection. Is that what you did with Ms. Hale? Figured out who she really was? Sarah's expression softened. Vivian and I have known each other for 12 years. We started at this company the same month, both of us young and ambitious, and determined to prove ourselves in a world that didn't make it easy for women to succeed. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I watched her build those walls brick by brick, watched her become the ice queen everyone whispers about, and I always wondered what it would take to bring them down. And now? Now I'm watching her rebuild. Slowly, cautiously, like someone learning to walk again after a long illness. Sarah met his eyes with an intensity that reminded him of Vivian herself. She talks about you, you know. Not often, not in detail, but enough for me to understand that whatever happened that night changed something fundamental in her. I just drove her to safety. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have completed the ride and moved on with their lives. You stayed. You took risks you didn't have to take. You treated her like a person when she needed it most. Sarah stood and gathered her things. Don't underestimate what that meant to her, Ethan, and don't underestimate what it could mean for both of your futures. The work itself was demanding but rewarding. Ethan found himself managing schedules for 3 senior executives, coordinating meetings with clients across different time zones, and serving as the point of contact for various administrative needs throughout the department. His days were full, his mind constantly engaged, and for the first time in years he felt like he was building something rather than just surviving. The regular hours transformed his relationship with Maya. Instead of leaving for work as she was getting ready for bed, he was now home for dinner every night. He could help with homework, read bedtime stories, be present for the small moments that had previously slipped through his fingers like water. "Daddy, you're different now," Maya observed one evening as they worked on a puzzle together at the kitchen table. "Different how?" "Less tired. More... Here." She placed a puzzle piece with careful precision. "Before, even when you were home, part of you was always thinking about work, about money and stuff. Now, you're just... you. I'm sorry I was so distracted before. It's okay. I know you were doing it for me." She looked up with those wise old eyes in her young face. "But I like this version of you better. The one who has time to do puzzles. I like this version better too. Patricia noticed the change as well, commenting on it during their Sunday dinners, which had become a regular tradition now that Ethan's schedule allowed for such luxuries. "You're sleeping better," she observed. "I can see it in your face. The shadows under your eyes are gone. The regular hours help, and not having to worry every month about whether we'll make rent." "It's more than that." Patricia passed him the bowl of mashed potatoes, her expression thoughtful. "You're carrying yourself differently, like you finally believe you deserve to be where you are." "Do I deserve it? Sometimes I still feel like an imposter, like any minute they're going to realize they made a mistake." "Everyone feels that way at first. It's called being human." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "But let me tell you something, Ethan. I've watched you work yourself to the bone for years, sacrificing everything for that little girl. If anyone deserves good things, it's you." At work, his relationship with Vivian evolved into something neither of them had expected. She remained his boss, maintained professional boundaries, kept the necessary distance that her position required. But underneath the formal interactions, there was an understanding, an unspoken acknowledgement of the connection forged on that rainy Friday night. She would stop by his desk sometimes, ostensibly to discuss scheduling or review upcoming meetings, but the conversations would drift into other territory. She asked about Maya, remembered details he'd mentioned in passing, showed genuine interest in his life outside the office. "How's the school situation?" she asked one afternoon, leaning against his desk with a casualness that would have been unthinkable months earlier. "Good. Maya's teacher says she's excelling in reading and art, struggling a bit with math, but she comes by that honestly." "You weren't good at math?" "I was fine at math, just never saw the point of it beyond the basics." He smiled. "My daughter, on the other hand, informed me last week that she doesn't need to learn multiplication because she's going to be an artist, and artists don't multiply things." Vivian laughed, a genuine sound that still surprised people who overheard it. "She sounds like quite a character." "She's the best thing I've ever done. The only thing I've ever done that I'm completely proud of." "That's not true." Vivian's voice softened. "You should be proud of plenty of things, including how you handled a situation that most people would have walked away from." "You mean that Friday night?" "I mean every night since then. Every day you've shown up here and proved that you belong, despite everyone who doubted you, including yourself." Before Ethan could respond, her phone buzzed with a reminder. The moment broke, and Vivian straightened, her professional mask sliding back into place. "I have a meeting with the Henderson account in 10 minutes. We'll need the conference room prepared with the financial projections on screen." "Already done. I set it up this morning." "Of course you did." She started to walk away, then paused. "Ethan, thank you. For setting up this conference room? For everything." The Henderson account meeting went well, as did the 3 other client presentations that week. Ethan found his rhythm, learned the peculiarities of each executive he supported, and began to build a reputation as someone who could be relied upon to make things happen. But not everyone welcomed his presence on the 7th floor. Richard Calloway was a senior associate who had been passed over for promotion twice, and who seemed to have made it his personal mission to remind everyone that he deserved better. He was the kind of man who smiled while sharpening knives, who complimented you to your face and questioned your competence behind your back. He cornered Ethan in the supply room during the 3rd week, blocking the doorway with his broad shoulders and an expression of false friendliness. "Cole, right? The new admin?" "That's me." "Interesting background you've got. I hear you used to clean these offices." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Quite a jump, from janitor to coordinator. Makes you wonder who you know, rather than what you know." Ethan felt the familiar tension of someone trying to put him in his place, the same energy he'd encountered countless times during his years in service positions. "I know plenty," he said calmly, "including how to do my job." "I'm sure you do. I'm sure Ms. Hale wouldn't have hired you otherwise." Richard leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But between us, some people are starting to talk, wondering what kind of special relationship you have with the boss that got you this position." "I applied through HR. Same as anyone else." "Of course you did. Of course." Richard straightened, his smile widening. "I'm just saying, it's a small world up here on the 7th floor. People notice things. People talk. And if there's anything inappropriate going on, well, that kind of thing has a way of coming to light. There's nothing inappropriate about my relationship with Ms. Hale. She's my boss. That's it. I believe you. Truly, I do. Richard stepped aside, finally clearing the doorway. Just some friendly advice, new guy to new guy. Be careful who you align yourself with. Corporate winds change fast, and the people on top today might not be there tomorrow. He walked away before Ethan could respond, leaving a wake of implied threat and barely concealed hostility. Ethan stood in the supply room for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to chase after Richard and say something he would regret. This was the part of corporate life no one warned you about. The politics, the backstabbing, the endless jockeying for position and power. In the night shift world, competition was straightforward, about who worked hardest and who showed up when needed. Here, on the 7th floor, competition was a different beast entirely. He mentioned the encounter to Sarah during their next coffee break, keeping his voice low despite the relative privacy of the break room. Richard Calloway, Sarah said, her expression darkening. He's been gunning for Vivian's position for years. Thinks he deserves it, thinks she only got promoted because of affirmative action, the usual garbage from mediocre men who can't accept that women might actually be more qualified than them. He implied there was something going on between me and Vivian, something inappropriate. Of course he did. It's his standard playbook. Can't attack someone's competence, so attack their character instead. Sarah set down her coffee with more force than necessary. Don't let him get to you. That's what he wants. What if he starts spreading rumors? What if people actually believe him? Then let them. The truth has a way of winning out over gossip, especially when your work speaks for itself. She studied him with the assessing gaze of someone who had survived corporate politics for many years. You're doing a good job, Ethan. People are noticing. The right people. And nothing Richard Calloway says is going to change that. But the encounter stayed with him, a splinter under his skin that he couldn't quite dislodge. He found himself second-guessing his interactions with Vivian, maintaining extra distance, choosing his words with excessive care. The easy rapport they'd been building began to feel dangerous, weighted with implications he hadn't considered. Vivian noticed. Of course she noticed. You've been avoiding me, she said one evening, catching him as he was preparing to leave for the day. Most of the floor had emptied out, leaving them alone in the corridor outside his small office. I haven't been avoiding you. I've been doing my job. You've been doing your job from a careful distance. You used to stop by my office to discuss scheduling. Now you send emails. She crossed her arms, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration. What changed? Ethan hesitated, weighing his options. He could lie, make up some excuse about being busy or overwhelmed, but dishonesty had never sat well with him, and Vivian had shown him enough trust to deserve the truth. Richard Calloway cornered me in the supply room last week, made some implications about why I got this job, suggested there might be something inappropriate between us. Vivian's expression hardened. What exactly did he say? Nothing explicit, just enough to make his meaning clear, and to let me know that people are watching. Ethan met her eyes. I don't want to give anyone ammunition. I don't want to do anything that could hurt your reputation or mine. For a moment, Vivian said nothing. Then she uncrossed her arms and took a step closer, her voice dropping to something just above a whisper. Richard Calloway is a small man who has spent his entire career resenting people who succeed where he fails. He's been trying to undermine me for years, and now he's found a new angle of attack. Her jaw tightened. But I refuse to let his pettiness dictate how I run my department or how I interact with my employees. It's not about letting him win. It's about being smart. Being smart doesn't mean hiding from false accusations. It means doing your job so well that no one can question your value. She held his gaze with an intensity that reminded him of that night in the car when she'd looked at him with desperate gratitude. You earned this position, Ethan. Through your interview, through your work, through every single day you've shown up and proven yourself. Don't let Richard Calloway or anyone else make you doubt that. I don't doubt my work. I doubt... He trailed off, unsure how to articulate what he was feeling. You doubt whether people will believe the work over the gossip. Vivian nodded slowly. I understand. I've spent my entire career dealing with that same doubt. Being a woman in leadership means constantly proving that you earned your position, that you didn't sleep your way to the top or get promoted because of diversity quotas. That's not the same thing, isn't it? We're both outsiders, Ethan, both people who don't fit the traditional mold of success. And there will always be people like Richard who try to tear us down because they can't accept that we might actually deserve to be here. She took a breath, and some of the intensity left her voice. But we can't let them win by retreating into ourselves. That's exactly what they want. The conviction in her words sparked something in Ethan's chest, a recognition of the truth she was speaking. He had spent so long trying to be invisible, trying to avoid conflict and controversy, that the instinct to retreat had become automatic. But retreating now would mean letting Richard's insinuations become a self-fulfilling prophecy, would mean accepting that he didn't belong here. And he did belong here. He'd earned this. "You're right," he said finally. "I'm sorry. I let him get in my head. Don't apologize. Just don't let it happen again." A hint of a smile crossed Vivian's face. "Besides, the best revenge against people like Richard is success. Keep doing your job well, and eventually he'll have nothing left to say. And if he keeps spreading rumors anyway, then we deal with it together." She turned to walk away, then paused. "Ethan, that night you helped me, you told me that no one should have to be scared alone. The same applies to this. Whatever challenges come up, we face them together. That's what colleagues do." After she left, Ethan stood in the corridor, processing their conversation. He thought about Richard's insinuations, about the invisible politics of the 7th floor, about all the ways this new life was more complicated than his old one. But he also thought about Maya, about the bedtime stories and weekend puzzles and the joy on her face when she showed him her latest artwork. He thought about Patricia, about her pride and her relief that her son was finally building something sustainable. He thought about the cleaning crew he'd left behind, about Jerome's advice to not forget where he came from. He had too much to lose to let Richard Calloway win, and too much to prove to let fear hold him back. The next morning, Ethan arrived at work 15 minutes early and went directly to Vivian's office to review the day's schedule. It was a small gesture, a deliberate choice to maintain their professional routine, despite the whispers that might follow. But it felt important, felt like a statement of intent. Vivian looked up when he knocked, and something in her expression softened when she saw him standing there. "The morning briefing," he said, holding up the tablet where he'd organized her appointments. "I thought we could go through it in person, like we used to." "That sounds perfect. Come in." He walked into the corner office, past the succulents he'd been watering for years, past the photograph of Vivian and her mother that he'd noticed so long ago. And as he began reviewing the day's schedule, he felt something settle inside him. This was where he belonged, not because of favors or connections, but because of the work he did and the person he was. And nothing Richard Calloway or anyone else said was going to change that. The weeks that followed tested that conviction in ways Ethan hadn't anticipated. Richard's campaign of whispers continued, subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but persistent enough to create an undercurrent of tension throughout the department. Ethan heard the whispers secondhand, caught the sidelong glances, felt the subtle shift in how certain people treated him. But he also noticed something else, something that gave him hope. The people who actually worked with him, who saw his competence firsthand, began to push back against the rumors. Sarah defended him openly in meetings. The other administrative staff compared notes and concluded that Ethan was one of the hardest workers on the floor. Even David Chen from HR made a point of mentioning how pleased he was with Ethan's performance during a routine check-in. The truth, as Sarah had promised, was winning out over the gossip. And then, 6 weeks into his new position, something happened that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the office was buzzing with the particular energy that preceded a major client presentation. The Morrison Group, one of Franklin and Meyer's biggest accounts, was considering expanding their contract, and Vivian had been preparing for weeks. Everything had to be perfect, every detail in place, every contingency planned for. Ethan had been coordinating the logistics, ensuring the conference room was set up properly, that all the materials were printed and organized, that the technical equipment was functioning. He'd triple-checked everything that morning, confident that nothing could go wrong. But something did go wrong. 20 minutes before the presentation was scheduled to begin, Vivian discovered that the financial projections, the centerpiece of the entire pitch, contained a critical error. A decimal point in the wrong place, the kind of mistake that could cost millions of dollars and destroy the company's credibility. The error wasn't Ethan's. It had been made by someone in the finance department, buried in a spreadsheet that had passed through multiple hands before reaching Vivian's desk. But it was Ethan's job to catch these things, to be the last line of defense before information reached clients. He found out about the problem when Vivian appeared at his desk, her face pale and her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The Morrison projections, did you review them?" "I checked the formatting and made sure all the pages were in order. I didn't review the numbers themselves." "There's an error, a major error. If we present this to Morrison, we'll lose the account, possibly worse." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "How much time do we have?" 15 minutes, maybe less. 15 minutes to fix a mistake that had been made weeks ago, that had passed through multiple departments, that was embedded in dozens of pages of financial analysis. It was impossible. There was no way. "Show me the error," Ethan said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Vivian led him to her office, where the corrupted spreadsheet was displayed on her computer screen. He studied it for a long moment, tracking the decimal point that had been misplaced, calculating the cascade of incorrect figures that had resulted. "This affects every projection in the report," he said. "I know. We can't fix all of them in 15 minutes." "I know." Vivian's composure was cracking, the walls she'd rebuilt beginning to crumble under the weight of impending disaster. "We have to postpone. Tell Morrison there's been a technical issue. Buy ourselves time to fix this. If we postpone, they'll know something's wrong. They might take it as a sign that we can't handle their account. And if we present incorrect numbers, they'll definitely know something's wrong, and they'll never trust us again." Ethan stared at the screen, his mind racing through possibilities. There had to be a solution, some way to salvage this situation without destroying everything Vivian had worked for. And then he saw it. The original data. Where did these numbers come from? "Finance pulled them from our quarterly reports. Why?" "Do you have access to those reports? The raw data, before it was processed into this spreadsheet?" Vivian's eyes widened as she understood what he was suggesting. "You want to rebuild the projections from scratch?" "Not rebuild. Verify. If we can pull up the original data on screen during the presentation, show Morrison the source numbers and walk them through the calculations live, we can catch the error in real time. Make it look like we spotted the discrepancy ourselves." "That's insane. That's not how presentations work." "It's not how normal presentations work. But Morrison hired you because you're thorough, because you catch things other people miss. What better way to demonstrate that than by catching an error in your own materials?" Vivian stared at him for a long moment, the impossible choice playing out behind her eyes. Trust the unconventional approach of her newest employee, or fall back on standard protocol and accept the consequences. "Get the original data on my laptop," she said finally, "and brief me on exactly how you want to handle this." They worked frantically, pulling up source documents and rehearsing the narrative that would turn a potential disaster into a demonstration of competence. By the time the Morrison team arrived, Ethan had transformed Vivian's laptop into a window to the company's financial database, ready to verify any number at a moment's notice. The presentation began normally, Vivian's voice steady as she walked through the strategic vision for the expanded partnership. But when she reached the financial projections, she departed from the script. "Before I show you our numbers," she said, "I want to demonstrate something about how we work at Franklin & Meyer. We don't just prepare reports, we verify them." She clicked to the corrupted spreadsheet, and Ethan watched the Morrison executives lean forward, their attention sharpening. Vivian walked them through the projection methodology, then pulled up the source data and began cross-referencing figures. When she reached the decimal point error, she paused. "Here's an interesting discrepancy," she said, her voice showing none of the panic she must have been feeling. "The process number shows 2.4 million, but the source data indicates 0.24 million. That's a factor of 10 difference." The lead Morrison executive frowned. "You're saying your own report has an error?" "I'm saying we caught an error that was introduced during the data processing phase, which is exactly why we verify everything before presenting it to clients." Vivian smiled, the expression carrying a confidence that Ethan knew was hard-won. This is the level of scrutiny we apply to every project. The question isn't whether mistakes happen. The question is whether they get caught before they cause damage. The room was silent for a moment. Then the Morrison executive nodded slowly. That's impressive. I've never seen a company admit to an error in their own materials during a pitch. We believe in transparency and in showing clients exactly what they can expect from working with us. Vivian clicked to the next slide. Now, let me show you the corrected projections. The rest of the presentation went smoothly. By the time the Morrison team left, they had not only agreed to the expanded contract, but had expressed interest in additional services they hadn't previously considered. What should have been a disaster had become a triumph. After the last handshake, after the conference room had emptied and the 7th floor had settled into its end-of-day quiet, Vivian found Ethan at his desk. "That was incredible," she said. "I've never seen anything like it." "It was a gamble. It could have gone very differently. But it didn't, because you saw something I couldn't see, a way through the impossible." She shook her head slowly, wonderingly. "You saved that account. You saved my reputation, maybe even my job. I just did what you hired me to do, found a problem and fixed it." Vivian laughed, the sound carrying a note of relief that bordered on hysteria. "You fixed a problem that was unfixable. In 15 minutes. Using methods no one in this industry would ever think to try. Sometimes the unconventional approach is the right one." "Yes, it is." She met his eyes with an intensity that made the air between them feel charged. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything. Not just today. For all of it." "You're welcome." "And Vivian, you handled that presentation perfectly. The strategy might have been my idea, but the execution was all you. We make a good team. We do." They stood there for a moment, two people who had come from very different places and somehow found themselves standing on common ground. The professional distance was still there, would always be there. But underneath it was something deeper, a mutual respect that had been forged through crisis and strengthened through collaboration. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was worth more than any job title or corner office. The Morrison victory rippled through Franklin and Meyer like a stone dropped in still water. Word spread quickly, as it always did in corporate environments, about how the 7th floor had turned a potential disaster into a demonstration of competence that won them the biggest contract expansion of the quarter. People who had previously looked at Ethan with skepticism or suspicion began to regard him differently, their eyes carrying a new respect that needed no words to communicate. Richard Calloway's Whisper campaign, which had been gaining subtle traction for weeks, suddenly found itself without oxygen. It was hard to imply that someone had been hired for inappropriate reasons when that same person had just saved a multi-million-dollar account through quick thinking and creative problem-solving. The rumors didn't disappear entirely, but they retreated to the shadows, muttered by fewer voices and believed by even fewer ears. 3 days after the Morrison presentation, David Chen from HR called Ethan into his office for what he described as a routine performance review. But there was nothing routine about the smile on his face when Ethan walked through the door. "I've been doing this job for 22 years, David said, gesturing for Ethan to sit. "And I've never seen anyone make the kind of impact you've made in such a short time." "I was just doing my job." "You were doing your job exceptionally well. There's a difference." David opened a folder on his desk. "I've received feedback from multiple sources about your performance. Ms. Hale, obviously, but also Sarah Winters, the other executives you support, even some of the cleaning staff who wanted to make sure we knew what kind of person you are." "The cleaning staff?" "Jerome from security sent me an email. Said he wanted it on record that you never forgot where you came from, that you still say hello to everyone on the night shift, that you're the same person you were before the promotion." David shook his head slowly. "In my experience, that's rare. Most people, when they move up, they start to look down. You haven't." Ethan didn't know what to say. He thought about Jerome's warning on his last night with the crew, about not becoming the kind of person who forgets. He'd tried to honor that warning, had made a point of stopping by the security desk every morning, of checking in with his former colleagues whenever he saw them in the hallways. It hadn't felt like something worth noting. It had just felt like being himself. "The reason I called you in today," David continued, is to discuss your future with the company. Your probationary period ends next week, and I wanted to let you know that not only are we making your position permanent, we're also recommending you for the company's leadership development program. The Leadership Development Program? It's a year-long training initiative for employees identified as having high potential. Workshops, mentorship opportunities, exposure to different departments. It's how we cultivate future leaders. David leaned forward. It's not something we offer to administrative coordinators. Usually it's reserved for management track positions. But given your performance and the recommendations we've received, we're making an exception. Ethan sat with that information, trying to process what it meant. 6 months ago, he had been pushing a cleaning cart through these same corridors, invisible to the people who now wanted to invest in his future. The transformation felt surreal, like something from a dream he might wake from at any moment. I don't know what to say. Say yes. The program starts next month, and we'd like you to be part of the inaugural cohort. Yes. Absolutely yes. David smiled and extended his hand across the desk. Congratulations, Ethan. You've earned this. The news spread through the 7th floor within hours. Sarah stopped by his desk with a bottle of sparkling cider and 2 plastic cups, insisting they celebrate even though it was barely past lunch. Leadership development, she said, pouring with exaggerated ceremony. Do you know how many people would kill for that opportunity? Do you know how many years I waited before they even considered me? How many? 7. 7 years of proving myself, of going above and beyond, of doing everything right, and you managed it in 3 months. She handed him a cup. I'm not jealous. I'm genuinely not. I'm just amazed. I don't know why they picked me. There must be dozens of people more qualified. Qualifications aren't everything. They're looking for potential, for people who see things differently and aren't afraid to act on what they see. Sarah raised her cup. You have that, Ethan. You've always had it. This company is just finally smart enough to recognize it. They drank their sparkling cider in companionable silence, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows of the 7th floor. Ethan thought about all the paths that had led him to this moment, all the choices and chances and lucky breaks. He thought about that rainy Friday night, about a woman crying in his back seat, about the decision to help instead of simply complete the ride. Everything traced back to that moment. Every opportunity, every change, every step forward. One act of kindness, offered without expectation, had somehow opened doors he hadn't even known existed. Vivian found him at the end of the day, as he was preparing to leave for home. She appeared in his doorway, her silhouette backlit by the corridor lights. And for a moment, Ethan was transported back to that night in her corner office, when she'd surprised him during his cleaning rounds. I heard the news, she said, about the leadership program. Word travels fast around here. It does. She stepped into his small office and closed the door behind her, a gesture that would have made him nervous a few weeks ago, but now felt simply private. I wanted to be the first to congratulate you, but it seems Sarah beat me to it. She brought sparkling cider. Of course she did. Vivian smiled, and Ethan noticed again how much her face had changed over the past months. The hard edges had softened, the perpetual tension around her eyes had eased. She looked like someone who had remembered how to be human. I also wanted to thank you, she continued, for everything you've done since joining the team, the Morrison account, the daily support, the way you've helped change the culture on this floor. None of it has gone unnoticed. I was just doing my job. Stop saying that. Her voice carried a hint of fond exasperation. You keep minimizing what you've accomplished, and I need you to stop. What you did during the Morrison presentation was not just doing your job. It was creative thinking under pressure. It was leadership in a crisis. It was exactly the kind of initiative that this company needs more of. I learned from watching you. The words came out before Ethan could consider them, but they were true. He had learned from watching Vivian, from observing how she navigated challenges, how she maintained composure under pressure, how she had slowly begun to let down her walls and connect with the people around her. Something flickered in Vivian's expression, an emotion he couldn't quite identify. I've learned from watching you too, she said quietly, more than you know. They stood there for a moment, separated by the small space of his office and the invisible boundaries of their professional relationship. There was something in the air between them, an acknowledgement of connection that went beyond boss and employee, beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. But neither of them moved to close that distance. Neither of them needed to. What they had was enough. What they had was real. "Go home to your daughter," Vivian said finally. "Celebrate with your family. You've earned it." "I will. Thank you, Vivian, for everything. Thank you, Ethan, for showing me that walls aren't the same as strength." She left, and Ethan gathered his things and headed for the elevator. The ride down to the lobby felt different than it had that first morning, when he'd been nervous and uncertain and afraid of what might happen. Now he moved with the confidence of someone who had proven himself, who had earned his place not through connections but through character. Jerome was at the security desk, as always, and he waved when he saw Ethan approaching. "There he is, Mr. Leadership Development Program himself. You heard about that?" "Everybody heard about that. You're famous, Cole." Jerome leaned forward conspiratorially. "You know what they're calling you in the break room? The guy who went from cleaning toilets to cleaning up accounts. Some people mean it as a joke, but most of them mean it as respect." "I don't know about famous. I'm just trying to do good work." "And that's exactly why you're famous. Because you do good work and you don't make a big deal about it." Jerome extended his hand. "I'm proud of you, man. Seriously. You give hope to the rest of us." Ethan shook his hand, feeling the weight of what Jerome was saying. He wasn't just celebrating one person's success. He was seeing the possibility that success could be available to anyone, regardless of where they started. "Don't give up on yourself," Ethan said. "You never know what doors might open." "Oh, I'm not giving up. I'm just taking notes." Jerome grinned. "Maybe I'll be the next one to make the jump. Stranger things have happened." The bus ride home was peaceful, the city sliding past the windows in the golden light of late afternoon. Ethan thought about Maya, about how excited she would be when he told her the news. He thought about his mother, about the pride that would shine in her eyes. He thought about all the people who had helped him along the way, who had believed in him when he struggled to believe in himself. Maya was at the door when he arrived, bouncing with the particular energy of a 7-year-old who had been waiting impatiently for something. "Daddy, Grandma says you have news. Big news. What's the news? Tell me, tell me, tell me." Ethan scooped her up, marveling as always at how much she'd grown, and carried her into the apartment where Patricia was waiting with the expression of someone who already knew what was coming. "Your mother told you?" he asked. "Sarah Winters called. Wanted to make sure the family knew before you got home." Patricia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Leadership development, Ethan. Do you know what that means?" "It means Daddy's going to have more meetings," Maya announced, her face scrunching with displeasure. "Meetings are boring. You told me so yourself." "Some meetings are boring," Ethan agreed, setting her down. "But some meetings are about learning new things and getting better at your job. Those meetings can be interesting." "I still think they sound boring." Maya grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the kitchen. "Grandma made a special dinner to celebrate. There's cake. Can we skip dinner and just eat cake?" "Absolutely not." "But, Daddy..." "The cake will be there after dinner, I promise." They ate together, the three of them around the small kitchen table, and Ethan felt the fullness of the moment settle into his bones. This was what he had worked for, what he had sacrificed for, what he had dreamed about during all those long nights pushing his cleaning cart through empty corridors. Not the job title or the leadership program, but this, the ability to be present with the people he loved, to share meals and conversations, and the simple joy of being together. After dinner, after the cake that Maya declared was the best cake ever made in the history of cakes, Patricia pulled Ethan aside while Maya was absorbed in a cartoon. "Your father would be so proud," she said, and this time she let the tears fall. "He always knew you were meant for more. He used to say, 'That boy's got something special. Just wait until the world figures it out.'" "I wish he could be here to see it." "He is. He's watching. I believe that with everything in me." Patricia took his hands in hers, her grip stronger than her small frame suggested. "You've done something remarkable, Ethan. Not just getting this job or this program. You've shown Maya what's possible. You've shown her that hard work and integrity matter, that good people can succeed without compromising who they are. I'm just trying to be the father she deserves. You're being exactly that, and more." Patricia squeezed his hands. Now go sit with your daughter. These moments go by faster than you think." He joined Maya on the couch, and she immediately crawled into his lap, her attention split between the cartoon and her father. "Daddy? Does your new special thing mean you'll have to work more?" "No, sweetheart. It means I'll have to learn more, but I'll still be home for dinner every night. I promised you that, remember?" "I remember." She snuggled closer, her small body warm against his chest. "I'm proud of you, Daddy." Mrs. Patterson says we should always tell people when we're proud of them, so they know. Mrs. Patterson sounds very wise. She is. She's the wisest teacher in the whole school. Maya yawned. "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be like you." "Like me how?" "The kind of person who helps people, even when it's hard, even when nobody's watching." She yawned again. "That's the best kind of person to be." Ethan held his daughter as she drifted towards sleep, her words echoing in his mind. The best kind of person to be. He thought about Vivian, about how their lives had intersected on that rainy Friday night. He thought about the choices he'd made, the doors that had opened, the person he was becoming. None of it had happened according to plan. None of it had followed the path he'd imagined for himself. But somehow, through a combination of luck and effort and the willingness to help when help was needed, he had arrived at a place he'd never dared to dream about. The weeks that followed brought new challenges and new opportunities. The leadership development program was demanding, requiring hours of additional study and participation in workshops that pushed Ethan far outside his comfort zone. He learned about strategic planning and financial analysis, about leadership theory and organizational behavior. He struggled with concepts that came easily to people with business degrees, and he excelled at things they found difficult, like understanding the human element in every corporate equation. His cohort in the program was diverse, a mix of ambitious young professionals and seasoned employees being groomed for advancement. They met twice a week, sharing experiences and insights, building the kind of relationships that would serve them throughout their careers. Ethan found himself becoming a valued member of the group, his unconventional background providing perspectives that others lacked. "You see things differently," observed Tamara, a fast-track associate from the marketing department, during one of their study sessions. "When we analyze a case study, you always notice the people that the rest of us overlook. Habit, I guess. When you spend years being overlooked, you learn to pay attention to the people who feel invisible. It's an advantage. Don't ever lose it." On the 7th floor, the changes Vivian had initiated continued to take root. The department felt different now, warmer somehow, more connected. People lingered in the break room to chat instead of rushing back to their desks. Meetings included more voices, not just the senior staff who had traditionally dominated discussions. The culture was shifting, slowly but unmistakably, towards something more human. Richard Calloway, faced with the failure of his Whisper campaign and the undeniable evidence of Ethan's competence, retreated into a sullen silence. He still attended meetings, still did his work, but the energy he'd previously devoted to undermining others seemed to have drained away. Sarah speculated that he was looking for opportunities elsewhere, unwilling to stay in a department that no longer rewarded his particular brand of politics. "Good riddance," she said, when the rumors of his job search reached them. "This floor is better without that kind of energy." "Everyone deserves a chance to change," Ethan replied. "Maybe he'll be different somewhere else. Or maybe he'll be exactly the same and poison some other department." Sarah shrugged. "Either way, it's not our problem anymore." 6 months after Ethan's promotion, Vivian called a department-wide meeting to announce a restructuring. She stood at the front of the conference room, surrounded by the people she'd led through so many challenges, and spoke with a clarity and warmth that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "When I took over this department," she said, "I believed that success required walls. I thought that keeping distance between myself and my team was the only way to maintain the authority necessary to lead. I was wrong." The room was silent, everyone listening with the particular attention that comes when someone in power admits vulnerability. "Over the past year, I've learned something important. The best leaders aren't the ones who build the highest walls. They're the ones who build the strongest bridges, who connect people to each other and to a shared purpose, who understand that an organization is nothing without the human beings who make it work." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the assembled faces. "I want to recognize someone who taught me that lesson. Someone who showed me, through actions rather than words, what it means to truly see the people around you. Her gaze settled on Ethan, and he felt the weight of every person in the room turning to look at him. Ethan Cole came to this department from an unconventional background. Some people questioned whether he belonged here. But from the day he arrived, he has demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership this company needs. The kind that notices what others miss. The kind that solves problems no one else can solve. The kind that treats every person, regardless of their position, with dignity and respect. Ethan felt heat rise to his face, unused to being the center of attention. Effective immediately, Vivian continued, Ethan will be taking on expanded responsibilities as our new operations manager. This is a newly created position, designed to ensure that our department runs smoothly and that our people feel supported. I can't think of anyone better suited for the role. The applause that followed was genuine, the kind that came from colleagues who had watched someone earn their success. Sarah was beaming. David Chen was nodding approvingly. Even people Ethan barely knew were smiling, offering congratulations as the meeting broke up. When the room had emptied, Vivian approached him. "You could have warned me," he said, still processing what had happened. "And missed the look on your face?" "Never." She smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way it never used to. "You deserve this, Ethan. You've more than earned it. Operations manager. I don't even know what that means." "It means you'll be doing what you've been doing, just with a title that reflects it, making sure things work, making sure people are seen, making sure this department is the kind of place where everyone can succeed." "That sounds like a lot of responsibility." "It is, but you're ready for it. You've been ready since the day you started watering my succulents without permission." She extended her hand. "Congratulations, Operations Manager Cole." He shook her hand, and they stood there for a moment. Two people whose lives had intersected in the most unexpected way and who had both been changed by the connection. "Vivian," he said, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "That night, when I picked you up from the wine bar, I didn't know it would lead to any of this. I wasn't helping you because I expected something in return. I just saw someone who needed help, and I couldn't drive away." "I know. But I want you to know that even if none of this had happened, even if I'd stayed on the cleaning crew forever, I wouldn't regret that night. Helping you was the right thing to do, regardless of what came after." Vivian was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried an emotion that transcended their professional relationship. "That's exactly why it led to all of this," she said. "Because you did the right thing without expecting reward. Because you showed me what genuine kindness looks like. Because you reminded me that walls aren't protection, they're prisons." She blinked rapidly, fighting against tears that she would never let fall in a professional setting. "You changed my life that night, Ethan, not just by helping me get home safely, by showing me that I'd forgotten how to let people in. You changed your own life. I just happened to be there at the right moment. No, you chose to be there. You chose to stay when you could have driven away. That's not luck. That's character." They parted ways shortly after, Vivian to her corner office and Ethan to his newly upgraded space, which was still small but now bore the nameplate that reflected his new title. He sat at his desk and looked out at the city, thinking about all the paths that had brought him here. 1 year ago, he had been a night janitor and weekend driver, exhausted and struggling and barely keeping his head above water. Now he was an operations manager, enrolled in a leadership development program, respected by his colleagues and supported by people who believed in his potential. The change wasn't just external, it was something deeper, a shift in how he saw himself and his place in the world. For so long, he had defined himself by what he lacked, by the degrees he didn't have and the opportunities he'd missed. Now he was learning to define himself by what he offered, by the unique perspective and genuine care that he brought to everything he did. That evening, he picked Maya up from Patricia's apartment and told her about the promotion. Her eyes went wide with excitement. "Operations manager? That sounds really important, Daddy." "It is important. It means I'm responsible for making sure everyone at work has what they need to do their jobs well. Like making sure they have pencils and stuff? Something like that. And making sure they're happy, that they feel like they belong." Maya considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "That's a really good job, Daddy. Making people feel like they belong is the most important thing." "Why do you say that?" Because Mrs. Patterson says everyone needs to feel like they belong somewhere. She says that's what makes a school a real school and not just a building, the belonging part. Mrs. Patterson is very wise. I told you, the wisest. That night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat on his couch and looked around the apartment he'd called home for so many years. The same worn furniture, the same cramped kitchen, the same view of the street below. But it felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because he had changed. He thought about the future, about what it might hold. The leadership program would continue for another 6 months. His new role would bring new challenges and new opportunities. Maya would grow and change, would eventually leave for college and her own life. And he wanted to be ready for that, to have built something sustainable that didn't depend on sacrifice and exhaustion. But more than anything, he thought about the lesson that had started it all. The simple truth that had been revealed on a rainy Friday night, when a woman he barely knew had climbed into his car and shown him her vulnerability. Everyone is fighting battles we know nothing about. Everyone wears masks and builds walls and tries to appear stronger than they feel. The bravest thing anyone can do is reach out, to offer help without expectation, to show kindness even when it might cost something. That night, Ethan had chosen to reach out. He had chosen to see a person instead of a passenger, a human being instead of a transaction. And that choice had changed everything. Not because it had led to a job or a promotion or any of the external rewards that had followed, but because it had reminded him of who he was and who he wanted to be. The kind of person who shows up, the kind of person who helps, the kind of person his daughter could be proud of. Maya had said it best, in her 7-year-old wisdom. The best kind of person to be is the kind who helps people, even when it's hard, even when nobody's watching. Ethan Cole had spent years being invisible, and in that invisibility, he had learned to see what others missed. He had learned that the people pushing carts and cleaning floors and working the late shifts were just as important as the executives in corner offices. He had learned that dignity wasn't something that depended on job titles or salaries, that it was inherent in every human being regardless of their circumstances. And now, with his new role and his new responsibilities, he had the opportunity to make sure others learned that lesson too. To build a department, and maybe eventually a company, where everyone felt seen and valued, where the walls came down and the bridges went up. It wouldn't happen overnight. Change never did. But it would happen, one choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one person reaching out to another across the distances that separated them. The next morning, Ethan woke before his alarm, feeling rested in a way he hadn't in years. He made Maya's favorite breakfast, packed her lunch with a note that said, "You make me proud every day," and walked her to school in the crisp autumn air. "Daddy," she said as they approached the school building, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "You know how you told me that being good doesn't always mean winning?" "I remember." "I think maybe you were wrong about that." She looked up at him with those wise old eyes in her young face. "I think being good is winning, even if nobody else knows, even if you don't get a prize. Because at the end of the day, you get to be the person who did the right thing, and that's the biggest prize there is." Ethan knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in his. "When did you get so smart?" "I learned from watching you, Daddy." She smiled, gap-toothed and radiant. "You're the best teacher I have." He hugged her then, right there on the sidewalk, not caring who saw or what they thought. His daughter, his whole world. The reason he got up every morning and the reason he worked to become better every day. "I love you, Maya." "I love you too, Daddy. Now let me go. You're going to make me late." He watched her run toward the school entrance, her backpack bouncing, her hair flying behind her. She turned at the door and waved, then disappeared inside. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, letting the morning sun warm his face. Then he turned and walked toward the bus stop, toward the office, toward the life he had built through persistence and compassion and the willingness to see the humanity in everyone. The world was full of walls, but it was also full of doors waiting for someone brave enough to open them. And sometimes the key was nothing more than a willingness to help, to show up, to treat strangers as though they mattered. Because they did. Every single one of them. And Ethan Cole, former janitor, current operations manager, and always a father first, was living proof that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. Not just for the person being helped, but for everyone brave enough to reach out and connect. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But the foundation had been laid, the seeds had been planted, and the future stretched out before him like an open road, full of possibility and promise. One step at a time, one day at a time, one act of kindness at a time. That was how you built a life worth living. That was how you became the person you were meant to be.